discussion is increasing trust in supply chains with blockchain. And the moderator is Carolina Moulin. She is a PhD student at the Law Faculty of the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil, and also a visiting PhD student at the Luxembourg Center for Logistics and Supply Chain Management at the University of Luxembourg. And then she will discuss with two gentlemen. First of all, we have Drew Persson, who is a fourth generator Wyoming rancher, and actually being concerned about the price American ranchers are receiving for the cattle and the fact that consumers are not getting the information they want about the beef they buy. He was one of the founders of BeefChain. The other speaker, who we just welcomed now in the speakers area on stage, is Ziga Drev. He's the founder and managing director of Trace Labs, who are the co-developers of OriginTrail. Now, Ziga, he was born and raised in the countryside, and that made him acknowledge the benefits of local origin. He co-founded Trace Labs while finishing his MBA in Ljubljana, and soon recognized the importance of GS1 standards for business data exchange and introduced them to OriginTrail's services. OriginTrail is an integral member of the Walmart Food Innovation Pipeline, as well as the first winner of the Spark Award. Sorry. With that, I hope you have a very interesting discussion. I'm sure you will, and I give the floor to you, Carolina, for the moderation of the panel. You can all now switch on your mic. Done so. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Can you please confirm if you can hear me and see me well?
Yes, we can.
I can.
Great.
Yep.
I was having some trouble with connection, but now, yeah, everything's great. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank Tom for the introduction and also for inviting me to meet the moderator today. It is both a great honor and a pleasure and a challenge for me to be here today seated with three inspiring CEOs that have been applying blockchain in innovative and pioneering ways. So I'd like to welcome once again Drew, Ziga, and Douglas for accepting the invitation to be here with us today. Drew has joined us from the Wyoming time zone, so it's 6:30 in the morning there. Thank you, Drew, for this extra effort. So gentlemen, I will certainly learn a lot from the three of you, and I hope the discussion will be an enriching experience for you and our audience as well. Our panel today is centered around one keyword, trust. So when it comes to the application of blockchain to supply chains, what does it mean to talk about trust, about reliability? That's the question we are here to address today, and Benny and Nino already have given us fascinating presentations. But perhaps an initial way to frame it for our discussion will be twofold. The way I see it, on the one hand, and in a more immediate sense, we can think of how blockchain can foster transparency in a very diverse range of industry sectors. As a consumer, for instance, willing to pay more for the information, how can I trust that my food or my clothing was not produced with forced labor or illegal deforestation? Can blockchain offer an answer to this kind of traceability challenge? And on the other hand, and in a way that perhaps precedes or conditions the possibility of answering this first aspect, in my view, this topic raises the question on how to increase the general public's trust in blockchain itself as a new technology whose underlying mechanism for many consumers still seems kind of opaque. So it is along those lines that our conversation about increasing trust in supply chains blockchain will take place today. And in the first moment, each of our panelists will have some minutes to share with us their views and experience on the topic. Afterward, I will ask each of them one or two questions, but the idea is for the discussion following the presentations to be an open space for fluid conversation. So Drew, Ziga, and Douglas, please feel free to follow up on each other's comments. Just jump in without ceremony. I'll be also collecting questions submitted by the audience via chat. And via the question tool that is on the right side of your screen below the chat tool. So I'll try to collect some questions as well. And also please be alert because some audio polls will be popping out on your screen during our panel. So we want to hear your voice and want to make it as much interactive as we can. So without further ado, I would like to welcome, please, Drew, to be the first to share with us a little bit of your experience and your view on how to increase trust in supply chains with blockchain in the industry in which you operate. So please, Drew, the floor is yours.
Hello, like I said, I'm Drew Persson, and I'm a fourth-generation rancher here in northeast Wyoming. Wyoming's known as the Cowboy State. A little history about me: my family have been doing this for over 100 years. I had a great-grandpa that migrated here from Sweden and homesteaded where I'm at now. I had another great-grandpa that ran away from home from an abusive father and joined one of those and ended up in Wyoming. So we've been doing this for quite a while. And as far as supply chain with beef, what a lot of people or what a lot of consumers are dealing with is that they don't know where their beef came from. When they go to a supermarket or a restaurant, when you buy a steak in the United States anyway, you'll buy a steak and it'll say product of the US on there, but that does not mean that that animal was born, raised, or even processed in the United States. That just means it was at least packaged in the United States. And this is absolutely done on purpose. This information has been, and that's because there are three major meat packers or processors in the United States that have a monopoly, and they have a stranglehold on the input of live cattle and the output of processed steaks. And it works on their behalf to keep this information blurred because they're able to buy cheaper beef, pay a lot less for it from ranches and cattle in countries like Mexico and South America, keep the price down, so then they're not paying the American ranchers what their product is worth. And these packers are making enormous profits. The three packers are Tyson, JBS, and Cargill. Tyson is making an estimated $42.2 profit. JBS is making $24.9 billion in profit, and Cargill is doing about $20 billion in profit. And the reason that this has disrupted trust, there's been some DNA testing done on hamburger, and you can go to the store and buy a package of hamburger, and that might have more than 100 different cattle in it. And the reason that these big processors have so much power is because they're so consolidated, and they are very efficient and very effective in processing animals extremely fast and then being able to distribute them out there across the United States and the world. And this is because of their huge profits, this has given them a lot of lobbying power. JBS is estimated to spend around 7.7 lobbying regulations off their back. And because they are in the food supply chain, politicians don't want to disrupt that. And because of their lobbying power, they're also able to land things like $900 million government contracts. So what BeefChain tries to do is we have a USDA certified program where we can certify beef as all natural, meaning that they have received no hormones or growth hormones or antibiotics and were raised out of confinement. We have a non-hormone treated program. We have a source and age verified program, so we can verify where the animal was raised and how old it is when it comes time to be processed. And because we're from Wyoming, we have a Wyoming Plus program, which just verifies that those animals were born in the state of Wyoming. And so in using blockchain technology and these USDA certifications, we're trying to give that consumer the information that they're wanting. The University of Wyoming did a survey for us, and they found that 95% of people would be willing to pay more for their beef products if they knew where it came from. And so this is a way to bring ranchers more for their product. And ranchers are proud of what they produce, so they have no problem in sharing this information. So blockchain technology, and RFID tags. These RFID tags are put in the cattle when they're around when they're born or very shortly after. And the RFID tag and number, which is a unique number, along with whatever they're certified in, their certifications are put onto a blockchain. And so in using that technology, provide consumers with information and bring ranchers. We're also working on a consumer-facing product, a QR code where you can scan and get the history of that ranch animal from its ranch it was born onto your plate. And so that's what we've been working on as far as supply chain and creating trust. And
please, you were saying something? Okay. Well, thank you, Drew, for sharing with us such insightful comments. A lot for us to get to in a few moments. And if I could ask our next speaker, Douglas, please. The floor is yours now. Could you share with us a little bit about your experience and your view to increase trust in supply chains with blockchain?
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to join this session this afternoon. So my name is Douglas Johnson Poensgen. I'm co-founder and chief exec of Circulor. We were formed in 2017, so relatively early in the sort of the life cycle of attempting to apply blockchain to supply chains. And our core business focuses primarily on the automotive sector. We're working on both the responsible sourcing of critical raw materials, such as battery materials, and I'll explain why in a second, and increasingly on measuring and attributing dynamically a slice of the embedded carbon within the supply chain in the manufacture of very polluting goods. So first of all, then, responsible sourcing. Some of you may know that lithium-ion batteries contain elements like cobalt, lithium, and nickel. Cobalt are very much associated with child labor in the Congo. Some 60% of the world's cobalt is mined in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Lithium has concerns around water use in places like the Atacama Desert, and nickel associated with deep sea tailings into the Pacific from places like Indonesia. And so these are significant risks to the car industry because, of course, as consumer, our collective desire for electric vehicles as part of the energy transition shouldn't be causing more damage to the planet or abusing human rights in the process of creating them. And so demonstrating a chain of custody for materials through a supply chain in order to be able to support responsible sourcing is one of the key use cases. Now, the challenge, of course, with materials like ore from a mine site is that it undergoes multiple stages of transformation and amalgamation with other materials before it's incorporated in a battery cell and gets put into a car. Because clearly, the ore that is dug up in a mine site is nothing like a battery. And so you have to be able to not only give a reliable, and I know we'll come onto this in the conversation a little bit in a second, but you have to be able to give a reliable identity to a blob of stuff, which could be a 30-kilo bag of material dug up by an artisanal miner at a managed site in the Congo, or a 200-ton parcel of nickel from an industrial mine in Australia. And then follow that material through each of the industrial processes, because take, for example, chemical refining. The input ingredients are nothing like the output product, and yet you want the product to inherit the history of the input. I liken it often very much to a cake recipe. If you take so much flour, so many eggs, so much sugar, you put them through a known mixing process called a recipe, you stick it in the oven for an hour and you get a cake. That cake inherits the identity of the input ingredients, but only if the elapsed time and mass balance and key points in that recipe tests are passed. Now, that's responsible sourcing in order that you can demonstrate, for example, there's no child labor in your supply chain. Increasingly, we're working with car manufacturers now on helping them measure the embedded carbon in a product. Now, something most of us do not know or didn't, or just starting to get to know, is that the cost to the planet of manufacturing an electric vehicle is enormous, and it's primarily the battery. So, today with petrol and diesel cars, the vast majority of the carbon emissions come from the use of the vehicle in its life through the burning of fossil fuels. With an electric vehicle, clearly you are minimizing the tailpipe emissions, assuming you're using sustainable electricity to power your to charge your battery. But what you're doing is you're relying on a far more energy intensive supply chain, for example, for the manufacture of batteries. The EV battery accounts for 50% of the total supply chain's contribution, which is about 70% of all of the carbon embedded within the vehicle. So today, in the headlong rush for electric vehicles, what we're actually doing is worsening the planet problems because we haven't yet tackled the supply chain issues in terms of carbon. And so if you have a reliable chain of custody of the materials that, for example, come through the many steps of the network that is the supply chain to manufacture a battery, and you can attribute a proportion of the scope 1 and 2 emissions to each participant and each packet of material going through that supply chain, what you end up with is a means for a procurement director at a car manufacturer to be able to use procurement as a way of driving sustainability, essentially using sustainability measures alongside price and quality as key tools in order to buy more sustainably. What I've just described to you is not science fiction. It's happening right now with car manufacturers like Volvo and Polestar and some other car manufacturers starting to join this. The responsible sourcing bit we've been doing for a few years already. So that's a brief introduction to what we do. I'm looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Douglas, for this extremely interesting presentation, really. Thank you for bringing so much fuel for our discussion. And last but not least, let me call you Ziga, please. The floor is all yours.
Yeah, hey, hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you very much for inviting me. Yeah, I would very much like to echo many things that my predecessors have pointed out. There's something I will chat onto, which is blockchain and supply chains are not, a natural fit. And blockchain by no means is a silver bullet for supply chains. There are several reasons for that. If we look at the pure blockchains, which are more inclusive, and these are permissionless networks, we see that there are also poor interoperability between other blockchains, let alone the legacy systems. And last but not least, there are a lot of tendency from the solution providers to vendor lock in cloud supply chains. And in complex supply chains, this is creating a lot of confusion. And even when you look into the solutions that are being implemented right now, there is a very, very low level of interoperability. And these are kind of the lessons that we took to our hearts when we started building the solution, which is currently open source. But it did not start it as open source back in 2011 when everything started for us. This is almost 10 years ago. Of course, we did not use blockchain, but we actually started in beef supply chains, just like Drew explained. And beef supply chains are no different in Europe as they are in the US, so very much similar problems. Back then, our mission was to allow producers of beef, of quality beef, to distinguish themselves from imported less quality beef, and that was very much important. And the first rudimentary project that we implemented back then using centralized solutions that did not entail blockchain was actually very successful. Even nowadays, the same solution is being used by farmers from my home country, Slovenia. We managed to open up several sales channels because we used a solution, again, did not run on blockchain, but it did help them to get kind of differentiated from the competition. And they managed, because of that, to go into different sales channels, such as schools, kindergartens. They developed their own online sales using the same solution, showing to consumers where exactly. Important advancement. As a company and as a builder of the OriginTrail ecosystem, our main tendency has always been to improve transparency in supply chains and thus sustainability, and essentially by allowing multiple actors within supply chains to exchange trusted knowledge. And this is a very much important thing to to focus on, trusted knowledge. We see in supply chains nowadays, there are several complex solutions, starting with the legacy systems, SAPs, Microsofts, and all these solutions, and also other third-party solutions. So I'm not, pointing out the big brands only. And these solutions are very, very costly to maintain if you want to make them interoperable between other solutions. So let's say sometimes cause cost, and of course bring in a lot of other problems such as integrity of the data. And this is where we figure out that it just merely focusing on blockchain-enabled solution does not cut it. We need to build a middleware that will allow companies not only to select their preferred blockchain technology, but also to make their existing systems interoperable. Because we know that companies will not going to adopt this or that blockchain solution if they're not if these solutions would somehow mandate them to change existing processes. Now this is not going to happen. There is no silver bullet aspect to it. And in 2018, after years of development, we decided that the time is right to launch the open source solution OriginTrail. And nowadays OriginTrail actually is run by several chains, so it's not attached to only one chain. The network, the OriginTrail network, is indeed, but at the same time, we're not focusing on mandating its users to determine whether or not they want to use Ethereum, which is right now kind of a very costly alternative if you like to use blockchain for supply chain purposes. But we also offer them some other blockchain solutions, such as XDAI, which has a different consensus algorithm and thus brings in certain very, very important efficiency gains. And this approach, we call this approach a multi-chain approach, allowed us to enter more industries, allowed us to connect with more final users, simply because we were not mandating what kind of blockchain they should be using, but rather they were focused on the problem that they would like to solve. So nowadays, OriginTrail is being used by several different industry players from food supply chains. In food supply chains in Europe, we have approximately 500 partners distributed across different consortia that are using or discovering how to use OriginTrail technology for agriculture, agri-food supply chains. Same thing in the UK, which just recently launched a project supported by the Innovate UK. And the main aim there is to make data exchanges between different importers and exporters post-Brexit in the UK more coherent. Going forward, we saw that the same solution is very much industry agnostic, and it's now being used by the Swiss to exchange information between suppliers and them, and in that way the passenger safety. Moreover, British Standards Institution has implemented OriginTrail in pharmaceutical industry, and at the same time also implemented the OriginTrail enabled solutions in various different sectors, from the regulatory and compliance sector, and thus several US retailers like Walmart, Trader Joe, etc. are using the solution called Scan Trusted Factory enabled by OriginTrail to exchange auditing reports on some 20,000 Asian factories. So bottom line, what we aim to build is something which is not based on a specific blockchain, giving users liberty to select between multiple different consensus mechanism, and at the same time to maintain the same, let's say, processes which are kind of conditioned by the legacy infrastructure. So that's my side.
Yeah, thank you, Ziga, for providing us with such considerations. You mentioned twice that blockchain is not a silver bullet, and it's this sentence relates to my first question, actually. And if possible, I would like to hear from the three of you that sometimes we hear, and this phrase popped out here and there in yesterday's panel as well, that blockchain is a solution looking for a problem. But here you are, three companies that operate in very diverse and concrete supply chains, ranging from the beef and poultry chain in the food industry to the cobalt and lithium supply chains in the extractive heavy mining industry. And you all include blockchain among the technological solutions that you offer your clients. So we already touched this in your presentations, but if I could ask you to put it shortly, 2 or 3 sentences to summarize, what are the most common problems that your platform helps companies to solve? Or in other words, how do your solutions add value to your clients? if all of you could briefly comment on that, perhaps beginning with again the same order.
So with these USDA certifications, people are wanting to know what's been done to their beef. They want to know if it's received antibiotics or where it was from, if it's received growth hormones. In providing a USDA certification that no, this animal has not received any antibiotics, no, they have not received growth hormones, and they're from Wyoming or Montana or whatever state they were from, we're able to provide that information to the end consumer. So there's a trickle down, and ranchers are able to get more for their calves. We've seen in the last several years that ranchers are able to get at least more for the cattle when they sell them with using these USDA certifications. And we're with the forward-facing consumer app, we're working with producers that sell directly to consumers. Also having those certifications with their product being tracked on a blockchain, they're able to demand a higher price at restaurants.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Douglas, if you could comment on that also.
Yeah, so
3 sentences.
I've obviously talked about responsible sourcing and carbon tracking. What blockchain brings to this is the benefit of immutability, essentially notarizing transactions, where the amount of time between source of raw material and its use, for example, in a vehicle, is measured in sort of 6 to 12 months. And so you don't want history to be rewritten if it subsequently proves to be inconvenient. So it's the notarization of transactions in real time that don't make sense until much further on down through the supply chain. And of course, we're dealing with supply chains here where there is no central authority that somehow governs what happens at mine sites in the Congo and car manufacturers in.
Thanks, Douglas. Ziga?
Yeah, definitely consumer confidence and also customer safety if we talk about the industry. Moreover, definitely blockchain-enabled solutions, so not just kind of blockchain-based solutions attached to fancy blockchain application, but rather something that can interoperate between different legacy systems, can bring massive efficiencies in business processes.
Yeah. Well,
can I add one more point to mine? So consumers are also wanting to know that these cattle were raised in a sustainable way. That's become a kind of a big deal. And in this being tracked on a blockchain back to its original ranch, these ranches have been in families or have been run for over 100 years. So that's helping prove the sustainability. And that's helping also bring the rancher more money.
Yep. Yeah, Douglas mentioned decentralization. Decentralization relates to the second question that I have to ask you. So according to the report, Blockchain Technology Overview, published by the US Department of Commerce in 2018, although we frequently hear that blockchain networks are systems without control and ownership composed of immutable blocks, when we take a closer look at the technology, this would not be completely accurate, because generally there is an owner or a consortium of blockchain network users who allow publishing or removing nodes. Permissioned blockchains networks are usually set up and run by an owner or a consortium, whereas in permissionless blockchain networks, as not every user has the ability to inspect and compile the source code, software developers play a larger role in the blockchain network's governance. So I would like to direct this question to Ziga. You have begun to touch upon this issue in your first presentation. Ziga, how would you describe the governance of your solutions in terms of permission to access, publish, or remove information?
Yeah, so there are several aspects which we should touch here. At the be chosen by others. So what OriginTrail is a permissionless network that in its data layer also entails a decentralized knowledge graph. And this is a very important shift from what other blockchain builders are offering. So at the OriginTrail network level, OriginTrail is permissionless. Each party, however, decides whom they want to share data, so they can restrict access to the data, maintained. So more sensitive data would be maintained in the subgraphs to the decentralized knowledge graphs, whereas data which is kind of a public concern can be shared over knowledge graph and be seen publicly. So it's somewhat of a hybrid approach, whereby users can select which consensus mechanism they would like to use at the blockchain level, whereas at the OriginTrail network, centralized knowledge graph level, they can decide whom to share, and in that way maintain privacy and protect sensitive data.
Yeah, thank you. This conciliation of transparency and privacy is always a delicate balance. I have a next question to Drew, but before that, I would like to invite our viewers and participants to answer to one audience poll. I'll make it visible to you. Yep. So I would like to hear from you. I invite you to share your thoughts on this following question. What is, in your opinion, the main reason why companies hire traceability services? Would it be because of growing regulatory obligations, for instance, mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence laws, or perhaps because of increasing consumer demand for responsibly sourced products, willingness to gain more control over production, including far-reaching upstream suppliers, or the need to strengthen trust with downstream partners like retailers and distributors? So to our audience, what do you think? This relates to a next question that we asked, but we want to hear what you think about this. And while you respond, Drew, I have another question to you. Another issue that arises when it comes to increasing the public's trust in blockchains concerns the so-called the Oracle problem. That is the question of how to guarantee that human input data and sensor input data reflect real-world events, a problem that is not exclusive to blockchain, but to digital systems overall, or even to any activity of registration, one could add. From your experience with blockchain technology, do you think it's possible not to solve, but to minimize the risks associated with this Oracle problem? And if yes, for which mechanisms?
With that USD certifications, there's actually an on-site audit done where an auditor goes to the ranch to verify these claims, and then these claims go through a level 1 reviewer, a level 2 reviewer, then a project, and the ranchers essentially sign a legal document saying, this information I provided is true. So under basically the threat of fraud, they're supplying or giving you information.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Drew. Well, I have a next question to Douglas. Douglas, blockchain is considered to work well for finance and contract. Its implementation in raw materials is usually considered to be more complicated. In your view, what are the main challenges involved in the application of the technology to trace raw materials such as timber, minerals, and beef in comparison to the other more traditional, perhaps, applications of the technology?
Yeah, thank you, Carolina. So obviously, we've obviously touched on the need to create a digital connection for a physical good, which clearly isn't the case with financial transactions, which already have effectively a digital identity. So that's clearly one element of complexity. And the other thing is, in all of the examples we've touched on, we're all using a combination of technologies, including the blockchain. So in our case, it is, we have mobile applications, we have Oracle databases, we have a blockchain, we have machine learning algorithms, and it's this fusion of a number of different technologies together to solve a particular set of business problems in a set of circumstances that makes the solution useful. On its own, a blockchain doesn't do very much. It's an inefficient database. I know this may sound like heresy since we're in, the blockchain week, and clearly we're all believers, but it is on its own not a very helpful thing to be using in supply chains. And most of the business logic in our application is actually within the databases, not in the smart contracts within the blockchain itself. The smart contracts are used as a way of achieving consensus and writing data to the chain. So and the other thing, of course, is that a technology solution like the ones that each of us here is talking about does not of itself do away with any form of due diligence. Physical due diligence, auditing of working conditions, for example, verification of self-declared compliance, for example, cannot be done just with a technology, even if you can identify anomalies in the data that is provided, whether that's through benchmarking with others or verification from third-party data sources. Of itself, these technologies do not do away with all forms of physical due diligence.
Yeah, thank you, Douglas. You mentioned a combination. Yeah, please.
Sorry, you may continue. Just wanted to add something after you complete your question. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that Douglas mentioned a combination of technology, and on Circulor's website, they have a very quite catchy expression for this, a symphony of technology. This musical metaphor quite caught my attention. I was just going to add this symphony of technology. It seems really the key for tracing raw materials. But please, Ziga.
Just briefly, the reason why each of these three examples, whether it's BeefChain, OriginTrail, or us, have gained some traction in our respective markets is because we've deeply understood the actual business problem and worked out what combination of technologies together can be brought to bear in order to solve a problem better than the status quo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I echo sentiment with Douglas. If you want to bring value to complex supply chains, you should not behave as a company. You should behave as an ecosystem, and you should instill ecosystem equipment already installed in various supply chains. And if you look at the recent jam in the Suez Canal, where one ship blocked the entire global economy, it was not about the lack of the most beyond state-of-the-art equipment. It was rather the lack of ecosystem in those complex or less complex devices, or ship were from the Suez Canal Authority, so they should have known better how to operate the ship. But the problem was how to navigate between different highly technical solutions which are not interoperating amongst themselves. So there is a lack of ecosystem thinking in supply chains, and unless we as builders offer solutions which are capable of not just disrupting what exists, but rather create compounding effects between new solutions plus the legacy solutions, until we don't instill that thinking, we're not going to be seeing value being built. And I do agree with both speakers. We had client, for example, coming to us, and their main might be disrupted by blockchain technology. And when we shown to them that actually blockchain-enabled technology can add to the compounding effects already created by their business model, this is when they actually jump on board and saw that it makes sense to use decentralized solutions.
Yeah, gentlemen, the conversation is very interesting. I prepared also all the other questions, but I think our session is coming to an end. I think we started 10 minutes later than we should, but perhaps we already extrapolated a few minutes, and I apologize for the. So I think I'll have to stop the discussion here. Well, thank you very much for your participation. It was a pleasure for me to listen to your experiences. I hope the debate was fruitful for you and for our audience as well, and that you all leave this session knowing more about blockchain and how it can increase trust in supply chains. And I wish the three of you all the luck with the projects and the challenges that your companies are facing. I hope to see you thriving even more in the respective sectors in which you operate. And Tom, I hand the word back to you.
Thank you.